Welcome. Violence provides many details and lore about the worlds above, which can help us establish a timeline. First, I highly recommend you watch my previous video on the explicit lore introduced with violence. That is the groundwork that this video will be built upon. The unending halls of the garden. So dutifully decorated by the cross. The symbol that the angels use for the tree of life. They praise their beloved Father, who had planted it and filled us with the dew of its leaves and the nectar of its fruit. That which gives us life courses through our veins. For you, however, our truth, our bodies are not a vessel for the blood of the fruit, but its prison. The beautiful guts and gorgeous bone yearn to be shown and seen. Splay! Under the divine cross of the tree of life, we pay it tribute through the art of violence. The world is your canvas, so take up your brush and paint the world red. That was the first instance of lore given to us in the layer of violence. It says that the crosses are symbols of the tree of life, planted by God, whose nectar exists within us and gives us life, later saying that this nectar is in fact blood. Later in the level, we find creatures made of pure blood. When killed, the blood seeps through the ground and fills the tree, causing it to bloom. Not only this, it changes the world around us. The first tree gives us the starry sky. The second tree turns the stars red and creates lightning. In the next level, we see roots of the bloody bark literally root the earth mover in place. These trees, fueled by blood, change the world around us. And that's ignoring hell telling us directly to feed it, and Hikita's comment that the machines are also attempting to feed the trees at the behest of hell. Now, consider this. Machines today are widely regarded as cold and unfeeling, with any hint of emotion being dismissed as programmed. In ULTRAKILL, machines powered by blood have some unique traits. V2 bows before its first fight and cracks its knuckles in the second. It gets angry when you punch it with its old arm and screams as it falls. Mind flayers create a plastic gender body for themselves that it will use everything in its power to protect from harm, even if that means destroying itself in the process. The Swords machine keeps its vocalization module. And rebuilt itself from scrap. Drones are naturally curious and scavenge parts in hell to shoot hell energy. Street cleaners desire purity by fire, going from burning air particles to burning everything by their own choice. In addition, a direct quote by Hikita confirms that the insides of most machines are flesh and meat. In my ARG video, I theorized that Hell's sapience is a result of blood being a life force of some kind. Maybe, just maybe, transferring blood into something creates life. Either it makes a new individual, or it is a warped version of the original owner. Blood contains the soul and life of an individual. This layer, I think, confirms this theory. Blood is, in fact, synonymous with life. Look again at the Book of Violence. The cross symbolizes the tree of life, which has a human heart with branching blood vessels. This nectar is blood. By the transitive property, blood is fuel and a vessel for life itself. When blood enters something in the form of fuel of some kind, it gives that thing sentience. This would mean that the blood-fueled machines we fight are just as alive as humans. It would mean that V1, as a blood-fueled machine, is just as alive as the player controlling it. Being a machine in ULTRAKILL's world would involve just as much biology as engineering. I also think it makes sense that blood as fuel means not just gasoline for your car, but also it is literally why the machine can act and think. Because that's what blood is in this universe. It gives life to its container. The massive reservoir of blood in the Earthmover isn't meant to be guzzled. It's also used to simply give life to the Earthmover and allow it to move on its own. V1 doesn't contain blood as a way to consume it as required for future use. It's how V1 is alive. Being damaged doesn't mean they just poked a hole in your gas tank. It pokes a hole into your very being, robbing you of your life force only for a moment. Unfortunately, the machines work in a way that constantly dwindles their life force, blood supply. They do require blood as a simple fuel source, similar to gasoline. It's as if you do not need to eat or drink, but your soul is constantly replenished via an external source, since simply existing uses up your supply. I do have to note that this was not made with purpose. Humanity did not know that blood gives life at this point. All that they knew is that put blood in a machine and it starts working. And so they ran with it. So, if blood is fuel, how often must it be replaced? Well, let's think about it. If you're fueled by blood, then your blood runs out eventually and needs to be replaced. However, V1 can stand still for hours, and its blood supply does not decrease by 1%. The Earthmover also has this gigantic collection of blood. How often does this thing need refueling? Does the Earthmover need hundreds of thousands of liters of blood every week or so? No, I don't think it's that often. The former can just be a gameplay thing, but the latter can imply that blood fueling is actually remarkably efficient. Of course, the amount of blood you need scales with the size of the machine, but the fact that more than a few Earthmovers were able to be built utilizing this massive reservoir means that from an engineering perspective, it's worth it.
Well, I guess that'll do.
The point is that blood fueling is a highly efficient resource. Coincidentally, humanity just happened to discover that it makes machines move on their own, not realizing that they just brought life to their machines and pitted them against each other for 2 centuries. That said, there must be an essential distinction. Blood and soul in ULTRAKILL are 2 separate, discernible things. Blood gives life, but the soul is exclusive to humanity. Every human being has a soul, but not every living thing has a soul. The soul is what determines their terminus upon death. Heaven or hell. Essentially, that's what the soul appears to be. A tangible way to weigh a person's virtuosity and sins, to place them in a determined extra-dimensional destination. Husks, demons, angels, and machines have no soul, but more or less, all of them can be considered living creatures, despite the absence of a soul. It is why V2 has that bravado, why the Minotaur wants to see the sky, why the angels get upset if they can't kill you. It explains why hell is alive. However, that is a headcanon for another video. That's not all that was confirmed, however. This next bit is a goodie. Let's re-establish some lore from Violence. The Gutterman's lore entry says it was built in the early days of the Final War, specifically the first phase, trench warfare. Onto the Earthmover, after humanity banded together to create the new peace from the brink of total destruction. The entry says 200 years of war. Watch this. The Gutterman was developed at the beginning of the Final War. The Earthmover says the Final War lasted for 200 years. Now, at the very beginning of the game, V1's boot-up sequence lists the date of its last firmware update as August 6th, 2112. Since V1's prototyping was cut short by the end of the war, the date listed here is very close to that end. 200 years ago. it was 1912. World War I began in 1914. World War I was also notorious for trench warfare. After a Serbian killed the Archduke of Austria-Hungary and the entire continent of Europe fucking exploded, World War I began. When Russia created the Gutterman, Germany made the gutter tanks specifically to counter the Gutterman. Thus, the arms race developed countermeasures for each previous blood machine. At the very end of the war, the Earthmover was made with 2 centuries of knowledge on blood machine combat and global war. While nearly impenetrable to attacks outside of the shield, it was vulnerable on the inside. Like the gutter tank created to counter the Gutterman, V1 was designed to counter the Earthmover. That's why the Earthmover in 7-4 specifically focused on you and was about to obliterate you at point-blank range until another distant Earthmover shot it and it lost its chance. V1 was in the middle of prototyping during the war, but the war ended before completion. V1 was discarded as demand for a war machine was effectively null when everyone said that we should be nice. That said, Hikita tells us there will be no further information on the final war and humanity's extinction. We have clues about the extinction, but not enough to come to a satisfying conclusion. Thus, it will likely remain a loose thread that is only solved in different reads on material and hit cannons. That is for another video, however. Subscribe to see it. But that's not all. Let's return to the Gutterman. The data says, forces from far beyond took notice of the cruelty man was capable of, and the suffering of these human blood supplies served as inspiration for the creation of the mannequins. In 7.2, you find a book written by a husk stating that it's been a while since the angels were last seen, and that they're taking the chance to escape out of the labyrinth. The data entry for the mannequin confirms the above, and that sinners attempted to escape the lair through the garden after the angels were noted to be missing after God disappeared. But as mentioned, hell made the mannequins into what they are now. So, between 1914 and 1918, the Guttermen were created as the first blood machine. If hell took inspiration from the Guttermen to create the mannequins, and the mannequins were husks who tried to escape because the angels left, and that was because God disappeared, that means God disappeared during World War I. He vanished after humans did unspeakable acts of cruelty against each other on a global scale, destroying themselves and the planet they lived on in horrific ways, with the gross meshing of hell and human ingenuity and cruelty only hastening his grief and retreat. The whole mess we're in now, with hell being thoroughly cleaned out because mankind is extinct, because Earth is inhospitable, because of the arms race we had with machines, starting with the Guttermen because of the final war, which caused God to ditch us, which caused hell to implode on itself with revolutions and rebellions, eventually leading to hell being thoroughly cleaned out, is because Gavrilo Princip shot Archduke Franz Ferdinand in 1914. What a dick. Everything you see in hell is a product of 200 years worth of time passing, starting with the final war leading to God's disappearance, to now, 200 years later, post-2112, picking up the pieces and finally wiping the slate clean. When I made my very first timeline video, I said this: now, all that occurred at an unknown point in time. It happened, but it's not clear when exactly. If it happened years prior, or if it even happened concurrently with the events happening on Earth. That's the right answer, old me. This war made God leave, and everything happened parallel to each other for over 200 years. Me using World War I footage in my videos to explain things was more fitting than I thought. With all of this in mind, we can effectively build a comprehensive timeline. I have a pretty good feeling about it this time, fellas. But that will have to wait for its own dedicated video. This video is a doozy, so let me recap. Long ago, God created the tree of life, represented by this cross. Its nectar is the blood that keeps all living creatures alive, meaning blood can give life and sentience to its container, be it demons, husks, angels, machines, or even the environment itself. Lastly, the final war is what we call World War I, but in ULTRAKILL, the fighting never stopped, because some world powers made machines fueled by blood, which were very efficient. These powers were so stubborn that they prolonged the battle for 2 centuries. It's also noted that God's disappearance lines up with the start of the final war in 1914. The events in Hell with restructuring and rebellions coincide with the war happening across Earth. The updates ahead are becoming more and more explicit and deep as we continue. I look forward to what God has to say in his 5th and final testament. We will surely meet again, eventually.